Hey everyone, I did some videos that had tips for beginning Savage Worlds GMs, whether you were just a new GM or whether you were just new to Savage Worlds. But now I want to do a video that focuses on some ideas for players. Hey everyone, it's Carl with Tabletop Tango. Look at the bubbles, do the stuff. We'd love your support. We'd love likes. We'd love subscriptions. We'd love comments, feedback, everything. Just do everything. So anyway, what do I want to talk about tonight? So today I want to talk about some tips, tricks for new players to Savage Worlds. So you're playing Savage Worlds for the first time, maybe come from another system. So here's some tricks that you might be able to take advantage of. The first is just start with the core mechanics. They're very simple in Savage Worlds. You have a target number of 4. You roll a die based on how much skill you have with D4, D6, D8. You add modifiers, and then you roll, and you're trying to get a 4 or above. If you get 4 points above that 4, you get a raise, and the raise means something. So that is the general mechanism in Savage Worlds. I have a video where you can learn the core mechanics of Savage Worlds in 5 minutes, just 5 minutes. And so you probably want to watch that video, and that'll give you everything you need to be a basic player, to know the basics of the rules. I mean, obviously there's always exceptions. The rule book for Savage Worlds is about 200 plus pages, so there's going to be material in there that goes beyond the basics, but start with the basics. It's very easy, and once you know those core mechanics, you're set for almost everything else in Savage Worlds. Second thing is, people get confused sometimes when the game talks about lengths or distances or whatever it is, and it's based on the die type. So like the range on a power is your smarts. Well, what that means is you take the die, let's say your smarts is a D8, so you take that value of the die, which is 8, and that would be the value in inches that you'd have for that power. Same thing for when it says you take like 1/2 of your vigor plus 2 to get your toughness. Well, if your vigor is a 6, a D6, that means a 6. So you take a 6 and divide it by 2, and it gives you 3 plus 2 would be 5, which is pretty typical for a toughness. So just keep that in mind. Simple little things. Sometimes people get a little screwed up with the math and what does that number mean. Third, let's talk about character creation. A couple of big things in character creation are edges and hindrances. And I think the important part is when you start thinking about hindrances is you do get this, you take hindrances to get build point, but don't throw away that opportunity. Hindrances have a lot of flavor to them, and there's a benefit for having hindrances that you want to role play because you can get a Benny for good role playing. And especially if your GM is open for you to say, hey, I just did something in my hindrance that now affects me in a negative way. How about a Benny for that? And the game master may give it to you, or the game master may be really good at watching your hindrances and giving you a Benny. So hindrances are throwaway just for points. When you talk about ones with mechanical disadvantages, you can still play those up and get that Benny from a lot of GMs. Obviously the mechanical part, it's easy to deal with, but it's still a role-playing opportunity. If you've got one arm, well, you've got one arm. How do you role-play that and make something interesting? Really lean into them. I think hindrances, just like in any other game, it's really fun to define your character, and in Savage Worlds, those hindrances really do a good job of adding that flavor. So lean into them. Take advantage of the fact you have that hindrance to make your character interesting and unique. And flip side, of course, is don't make your character one-dimensional. Don't say, oh, since I've got the mean edge, I'm just going to be mean and nasty and terrible to everybody. It doesn't mean that. You can be more rounded. Characters are two-dimensional. You don't have to make them one-dimensional, but take those hindrances for your points, but then realize they're fun to play. For edges, I think it's important when you're playing to think about what you want to be when you grow up. Where do you want your character to be? You don't have to know all the way through legendary but kind of what are you trying to build towards? And then you can maybe work with your game master to understand what that means. So, for example, if you really are looking at, I want to be the best gunner I can be, and I want to shoot at things, and I want to do that, you may start looking at what are the steps that I need to get there. So let's talk about somebody who wants to, their character concept is a dual wielding, um, street type person who pulls out the dual guns and go, well, what makes you maximize there? You're going to want to think about things like ambidextrous. You're going to want to think about things like two-gun kid and being able to build your character out to get those edges. Now, fortunately, those are easy edges, and they use the same prerequisites, which is agility D8. But in some cases, you may want to build out your character, and they have different skills that are needed, different abilities that you have to get there. And you want to think ahead of time, what's it take to get there, so that when you get through maybe 3 or 4 advances, you're ready to, when you hit season, take that seasoned edge that you've been building up towards. So like, for example, let's say in your concept of this shooter, yeah, it's really easy, those 2 edges I talked about, to say, well, I need that agility D8. I can really throw my points into that. I can throw points into shooting so that I have other shooting edges. Perfectly, makes a lot of sense. But then in the next breath, you say, well, I need a lot of action cards because I want to go first. So I want to get level-headed. Well, level-headed, that requires a smarts of D8. Well, you only have so many points to spend on those attributes. And so are you going to go D8 in both of them right off the bat? Are you going to say, well, no, I'll wait until I get the season so I can spend an advance point to get that attribute increase? Or what are you going to do to get there? So you can think about the trade-offs you'll have to make, and you may not be able to do everything at the same time. So what's most important to you? So just think about that. When you play with these edges, I think it's really important that, and you're only going to have so many, so it's really important that you understand what they do. What are the circumstances where you get the benefit? The reroll or the +2. There are circumstances where these things count, circumstances where they don't. Some edges remove penalties, like they'll remove -2 penalties that you might be looking at, like marksman, for example. They'll remove penalties. Well, remember, that's removing penalties. It's not adding a bonus. So or depending on the edge. So you really need to understand what those edges mean. So that when your game master is calling for a roll and saying, hey, I need you to roll for this, you're saying, oh, I get a reroll, I get a +2, I know how to play my edge, and I know what my edges do. Fortunately, edges don't interplay a lot, so it's not like if you got this edge and then you have this edge, something magically happens, and so you need to understand that kind of overlap and how that works. Doesn't generally work that way. Obviously, there's improved versions of edges, but generally, you can understand an edge, and then that makes total sense to you, and you can take advantage of that. Really, absolutely recommend understanding how your edges work. They're not that complicated generally. They tend to fall into that category of a bonus or a reroll or getting rid of some penalties or things like that, or adding penalties to others. They tend to be pretty straightforward, so it doesn't take much to understand them. So for sure, work through that and understand it. So now if you're looking at, next thing, so if you're looking at arcane backgrounds and you want to use powers, they're a little more complicated. There's things that go into them that you need to know and really read that section clearly, because you can do all sorts of cool things with powers because they have modifiers, lots of them that you get something on arrays, the effects you need to understand. And so when you're using powers, definitely don't forget about the general power modifiers, things like fatigue, selective. Remember, they're there because a fatigue on a spell, on a damaging spell, can just really up the, what it's doing. It's not just doing damage. Now it's giving fatigue, and that's affecting the ability of that person. So think about those general power modifiers and don't forget about them. Take advantage of them. I kind of alluded to it, but yeah, definitely know what the modifiers of your powers do. And I think when I play a powers character, I tend to have things I like doing and understand. And so I tend to know, my particular power that is, I know for this particular thing, I generally do selective. I generally do this, damaging. I generally, extra damage. I generally do. And so I know what that pool looks like. So when I go to use that power, I know right off the bat that that's 6 points. I don't slow down the game. I spend my power points. I activate the power and stuff happens, versus trying to do all that math at the moment it comes time for me to do my action. Um, but powers change over time and things you want to do. So absolutely, you can do that. I mean, I even created a power HTML page that's a power calculator where you can go and click the little boxes, check marks, and it'll tell you exactly what the cost of that power is going to be. So you don't have to do the math yourself. And I should probably put a link on that so folks can find it. Um, yeah. Uh, Next thing, it's almost should go first. Don't forget about support and test. One of the coolest things about Savage Worlds is that there's this mechanism where you can support your friends, give them pluses, and there's tests where you can impact your opponent, make them vulnerable, or make them distracted or shaken, or so don't forget about them. So if you're not combat effective, like you're not, um, the guy who's going to shoot the bad guy, there's nothing that stops you from using your skills that you have, your taunt or, you know, um, even science or something, right? There's nothing that says you can't creatively use those skills to support what that person is doing or negatively impact your foe. And, that's a powerful thing. If you can use your action to make your foe vulnerable, that does a lot for the rest of the folks coming in after you. So don't forget about that. That's, those things make Savage Worlds fun, and they're part of what lets your creativity flow. How am I going to use a skill to support? How do I find an interesting way so the game master will let me do it? So that's a lot of fun for tests and support. Um, Savage Worlds, next thing. Savage Worlds isn't a niche game, so there's not like classes. Now I know there's Savage Worlds Pathfinder, which has class edges, which kind of feel like classes, but there's really not classes. And so you don't have to worry about having niche problems where your character's only good at one thing and that's all they can do, and there's really not much else they can do unless they have someone else with them. You can mix and match and kind of spread a little bit. Take it, you can go deep for sure, but you can also do things like, yeah, I'm a heavy combat guy, but you know what? I also have a little bit of healing, so I could do field dressing. It makes sense for a character who's, and you've seen it a lot of times. The guy gets out of battle and he goes into that and he starts, pulling out the thing and cauterizing the wound. And sure, that makes a lot of sense. Why not have healing? Why not have some repair? Even if you're the best driver in the world and you've got ace, you got to keep your vehicle running. So you don't have to worry about that you've got a niche and you can't do anything else. You can spend your skill points, you can build your character out, make them interesting. So don't forget about that. Um, Another thing that players sometimes forget and they don't take advantage of is multi-actions. You don't have to just do one thing around, right? When it's your turn, oh, I attack. Okay, fine. That's an action. But you can do up to 3 actions. Now there's a penalty, right? -2 if you're doing 2 actions, -4 to all actions if you're doing 3. But there's times where taking advantage of having multiple actions can really make the difference in the action economy and what you can get done. If you have enough bonuses or you have the particular edges that give you bonuses, suddenly that -2 doesn't look that bad, right? Like if you're going to try to shoot twice in a turn, you get a -2, but what if it's a trademark weapon? Well, that gives you a +1. So now that -2 is a -1. So it's not as bad, and it gives you an opportunity to do 2 actions versus 1 action. Um, I like them when I have characters. I'm very multi-action oriented. I like to do multi-actions. Who cares if there's a -2? I don't care. I want to do 2 things. And lots of times I'll use a test with a shooting roll or something like that. So I'm testing the person, trying to get them upset, taunting them, doing whatever. And then if I am successful, then I can shoot at them and take advantage of the fact that I've got 2 actions, or help my partners out as I'm also still getting my attack. So multi actions, take advantage of them. They're one of the interesting things in the game, just like tests and support. Last thing that I'll talk about is bennies. Bennies are huge in the game. I mean, it's I wouldn't call it the lifeblood, but it's so intrinsic to the way the game works. bennies are. But new players, you got to be careful not to go a little overboard and spending your bennies to re-roll for successes. You start a session with 3, and even if you've got a great game master who likes to throw bennies around very quickly, and you're playing your hindrances well, and so you're getting those bennies, they're a limited commodity and they're valuable. So be careful. Sometimes failure is okay. Don't just keep throwing a bennies and wanting to be successful on every roll. You can because you may want those bennies for other things. Because remember, bennies can be used for getting a new action card. There may be a time when that's going first is very, very important, or going earlier in the round is very, very important. So you want to take advantage of. 2, you get a little narrative control with a benny, so that's a great thing to have. Soak rolls. Every player I play with, they tend to hoard that last benny just in case they need to do a soak roll. Now, is that right? Is that wrong? It's everybody's play style, right? But take advantage of the fact that bennies can be used for a lot of different things, and think about it. Don't just feel like I want to re-roll every time to be successful. Sometimes success is not necessary because you want to use that benny for something else later. So anyway, those are some tips, some ideas. Not an exhaustive list. Some of them you may disagree with. So put down in the comments what you think are better tips for a starting player in Savage Worlds. I'd love to see them, and we can all learn together that way. So once again, this is Carl with Tabletop Tango. Look at the bubbles, do the stuff, support, comment, like, subscribe. There's probably ring the bell. There's other stuff too. So anyway, thanks again for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video.